Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome to another edition of Atlas Information Live. I'm your host, Atlas Alex, and today we are going to be exploring a topic which we have looked at in the past, but recently I have found myself working on a renewed explanation of it, a new exploration of it, and explanation of it from the standpoint of quantity versus quality, or what is known in philosophical circles and scientific circles as quanta and qualia. As you probably can gather, we at present live in a world which is very much concerned with quanta, right down to our science. Materialist empiricism rules. And I don't really think that that's under contention. I don't think that anyone can make a reasonable argument that civilization and society values quality over quantity. Now, you might say, well, what about those elites, and what about all of those really expensive, high-priced art and high-priced goods, handmade Louis Vuitton handbags and Patek Philippe watches, and then, gosh, I'm so unplugged from everything these days. I don't know what all the brand names are. Hermes, and I guess Hugo Boss, and right, like Italian handmade, hand-tailored Italian suits, and it goes on and on and on and on. Surely there are facets of society who can afford such things are very much concerned with quality, are they not? The question is, would they really be interested in those so-called quality things if they didn't come with enormous price tags? And isn't it interesting how quality is measured by price? So certainly in the circles of fine art collecting, fine art is considered an investment, a tangible good that you can essentially sink your money into, that can conceivably appreciate tax-free, so long as it's kept in what are called free ports around the world. I don't want to get into the nitty-gritty of the financial system and tax avoidance and everything else that goes with it. But all of economics and finance is based around quantities. And the Qualia, the so-called quality goods and services, the quality brands, they are evaluated and valuated quantitatively. And again, it begs the question, would the elite, who are certainly the wealthiest individuals on the planet, They may or may not be the most famous or infamous, but they are certainly the wealthiest and most powerful, the most resourceful. Would they really take an interest in these so-called quality goods if the quality goods didn't come with an enormous price tag? And we can test this to a degree. And the way to test this is to consider the fact that we can go just about anywhere in the world and find handmade, handcrafted goods and hand-raised, handmade food by artisans and craftspeople the world over that are every bit as skilled, and that they produce is every bit as, quote, quality as anything that is sold in luxury boutiques in the posh neighborhoods of the most cosmopolitan cities of the world. And yet, the well-to-do, the wealthy and the powerful, they don't value those handmade goods by those artisans or journeymen or craftspeople. They don't fill their houses with, for example, Mennonite furniture or Amish furniture. And maybe they would argue because it's not the right style, or it's not the right this, or it's not the right that. But one can hardly argue against the handmade, hand-built quality and the craftsmanship that goes into those pieces of furniture. And I happen to be not too far from a Mennonite furniture store, and you can go there and find all sorts of contemporary designs and contemporary style furniture. It just happens to be handcrafted, handmade furniture by Mennonites. That's here where I live, the Canadian Ontario version of Amish. And it's not cheap by any means, but it certainly doesn't command the prices that, you know, so and so design house of Europe or Danish or Swedish or, you know, whatever brands of, or Italian brands of furniture, and that those brands and those designers, you know, the right designers with the right designations, the prices that they command. So whether we like it or not, the reality is that we live in a quantified world. Our civilization, even if it does claim to value quality, it really doesn't know what quality is unless there is a number, a price associated with it that signifies its quality or its rarity, right? So when something rare or one of a kind sells at auction, and because of supply and demand, there's only one of it in the world, and it's deemed valuable because of its qualities, well, then a number of individuals start bidding on it, and then and up goes the price. And then of course it's overblown and then makes the news. Why? Because it's sold for so many millions of dollars at auction, and oh my god, and all of a sudden everybody takes notice of it, and now it's a news story because we were able to quantify its rarity and its quality, its specialness. And it begs the question from a philosophical perspective. Does that is that appropriate? Because science, materialist science, certainly is of the viewpoint that only that which can be measured exists. From the scientific point of view, phenomena matter, literally matter, and figuratively matter, only if their existence and their significance can be proven and measured empirically. So much so that the cutting edge of science, or certainly physics, they refer to it as quantum mechanics. Quanta, the mechanics of quanta. And the more one looks at quantum mechanics, the stranger and stranger it becomes, and the less and less mechanistic and purely quantum it appears. And yet, it is studied and treated, and with the same framework, the same paradigm that science uses to study the material universe, where it's clear that quantum mechanics is this liminal space. It's attempting to describe a bridge that connects the metaphysical universe with the physical universe, and that there is a paradigm, a mechanic that constitutes the interface between these two worlds. But science, approaching it from its perspective, approaches it with this empirical quantum framework and mechanical framework, and very often has difficulty grasping those aspects of quantum mechanics which do not neatly fall into those frameworks. Those frameworks include, but are not exclusive to, Newton's laws of motion and Einstein's theory of relativity. The other litmus test for our societies, our culture's obsession with the material is, I'm sure you've heard this expression, STEM. And you may have yourself found yourself encouraged by teachers, parents, counselors, right? School counselors and so on, to pursue a career in STEM. Now, STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, math. These are the so-called hard sciences. These are the so-called serious studies, the subjects, the serious subjects on which civilization is based, is built. And these are the subject areas or fields where certainly academia and counselors and parents and so on encourage students to pursue because of the purported career opportunities that present themselves to someone who dedicates themselves to STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. And lately, well, let's not get into the AI argument just yet. But there is another letter over here off to the side. And we're going to use this letter just to, even though it stands for arts, realistically, it encompasses all of the so-called humanities. These are the so-called soft subjects. These are the subjects that deal with phenomena that cannot be wholly empirically argued or proven. There's the arts or the humanities. These do not require the so-called scientific method. So you have philosophy, for instance. Philosophy is a great deal of contemplation and speculation and argumentation, where you are trying to make a point, you're trying to assert some sort of theory or truth. And while there may be evidence that you can point to that exists in the natural world or in society or in shared experience, for instance, philosophy deals more with what are called thought experiments and case studies and analogies and allegories, as do most of the humanities. Even the topic of history is not considered science, despite the fact that history presumably took place. But the study of it encompasses a great deal of hearsay and conjecture. Like law, which one would imagine that on some level, the study of law has a sort of objective, finite nature to it, because you're dealing with laws. And don't laws state things specifically and in absolute terms? Well, as it turns out, we all know, not just because of watching legal procedurals on television and movies, we all know that the legislative process of writing laws is far from objective and scientific. And in fact, not just the legislative process, but the prosecution of those laws, all the way up to what they call the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, the Supreme Court justices issue what are called opinions. They are legal opinions. They are couched in the law, based on the law, but they are ultimately just interpretations of the law. Science, or at least materialist science, claims that it is beyond interpretation, that it is not, it is far more objective because it's solid, it's empirical, and certainly mathematics and engineering and technology will say that there's an exactness to what they do that is not open to interpretation. It's not open to the softness and the flexibility of and the hearsay and the conjecture and the subjectivity of the humanities and of the arts. So you have this division, this separation, this dichotomy, if you will. And that dichotomy is very much along the lines of what I mentioned earlier, that STEM deals with quanta and the arts and humanities, really, that these are the subjects of qualia. So poetry, for instance, the humanities talk about these ineffable aspects of life and humanity: love, integrity, honesty, courage, but also the negative aspects, right? Fear and pride and selfishness and villainy. There's no way to quantify any of these aspects of the human condition. But the STEM subject, science, doesn't presume to care about any of that. It says that those are a matter of course, they are what they are, and they don't have an impact on the practical aspects related to technology and engineering that the science and math support, and that the STEM subjects are here to improve quality of life, ironically, but do that in a practical, meaningful, material way. Again, coming back to what I mentioned at the outset, that this society, our humanity, is biased against qualia. You can hear someone like Jordan Peterson go on at length but the great virtues of capitalism and how capitalism has all but wiped out radical extreme poverty for 90% of the world's population around the world, or whatever the numbers happen to be at the time when he's doing that. And conservatives all over the world will argue this, that the great virtues of capitalism, and that how capitalism is this engine that drives quality of life around the world. And then like, capitalism and capitalist democracy exploded the middle class after the Second World War, and that the 20th century represented the greatest wholesale improvement in quality of life for humanity in the history of humanity that the capitalist methodology and the capitalist pursuit has improved the lives, the quality of life for billions of people around the world. And an argument can be made for that statement, that there's truth in that statement. But I don't think you can reasonably argue that the crux of that statement is material in nature. That because the so-called distribution of wealth improved materially people's lives, quantitatively, quantifiably, has, quote, lifted people out of poverty, then so-called it is dramatically improved their quality of life. But that's quality of life that can be measured. Measurable aspects of quality of life. That is what seems to be taken seriously. And only more recently have so-called powers that be seem to have taken notice that there are other aspects of quality of life which seemingly are immeasurable, or there's no easy way to quantify them, but they begin to show up in meaningful ways statistically when you start having vast numbers of individuals among millennials and Gen Z self-harming or self-deleting themselves or not engaging in public life, in social life, or not engaging in meaningful long-term relationships, in choosing not to be married, in not entering the workforce. And so in aggregate, when the statistics catch up to reality, the statistics begin revealing quantities of individuals who clearly, whether their quality of life, their material quality of life is up to snuff or not, clearly there is another level that is being ignored by the system. And that is a system that is, frankly, unconcerned with and incapable of accounting for qualia, for non-material quality, or qualities that cannot be measured because there's no money in it. There's no benefit to anybody in measuring those qualities. And isn't it interesting that when we look at this seriously, we discover that the foundations of a human being do not appear to be quantitative in nature. And that the qualia that we most value, what we most value, you cannot put a price on it. On the most primal level of this, the most basic primal level, I ask you, can you put a dollar value on your life, or the life of your children, or your parents, or your pets? What is the value, the numerical, quantifiable value of a human life? There have been attempts in the past to do just that. In fact, slavery as a practice that was practiced around the world for thousands of years, the entire business of slavery was putting market values on human beings. But that value was not measuring the value of a life, it was measuring the value of a slave. Because we put dollar values on human resources all the time. We are not measuring, the minimum wage does not measure the value of a life. It measures the hourly work capacity of a McDonald's employee or a Walmart employee or, a basic services or a basic whatever. It's simply a measure of the value of the inputs of an individual per hour based on an equation that says, well, that individual needs to be able to survive or they need to receive fair value for their work. But it's not, you can't say that minimum wage or any wage is measuring the value of a life. That's priceless. It's immeasurable. And yet, every living being on the planet values life above all, including all animals. They value their own existence and or the existence of their offspring and or the existence of their troop, of their pack, of their pride, of their hive. Have you ever seen bees defending their beehive and defending their queen against invaders, against intruders, against a bear who's seeking a sweet, nutritious treat and is ravaging the beehive, and you know that when bees sting, they die. It's like all the bees are like kamikaze bees, right? So there's this valuation that's going on that's not a mathematical equation. That's not some kind of quantifiable calculation. It's the same thing that when a dog runs into a burning building or jumps into an icy river to save a human being. The dog is not undertaking a quanta cost benefit analysis. They are acting on an impulse of pure knowing of the incalculable value of life. And that's what he acts on. And he's willing to risk his own life to save another. And no matter how you slice it, if life is immeasurable, the value of life is immeasurable, then the survival of one and the survival of another are on par. It's life. Life is priceless. So what makes someone risk their life for another and makes a dog risk his life for an other when the primal survival instinct is the strongest? Because there's an aspect of qualia which quanta doesn't have, which quanta lacks. And I assert that this is beyond argument. This is something that one knows intuitively, and that it is universal. Because there are things and people that you would give all that you have in exchange for. And when you look at wealthy individuals, the elite, and you look at the money that they are spending and the money that they spend on things like healthcare or longevity or buying private islands and building bunkers on those islands, there is an aspect of life there, survival, that they cannot put a price on, and they won't put a price on. And they're willing to spend their fortunes to protect, to extend, etc. But what is it? What is it about qualia? What is it about quality that quantity lacks? But quantity wants to dominate. It's like the natural tendency, the cold, hard, rational aspects of STEM. They want to be able to put a price on everything that has value. That is indicative of something. That's pointing us in a certain direction. Where is it pointing us? And what is it pointing us to? My contention here today is that there is a way for us to get to the bottom of all of this. You know, this drives me nuts, this whiteboard thing. Okay, let me see if I can. We've done this exercise before, but I'm going to try to go through it quickly. I don't know if you can see that, and if you can't, I apologize. If I make it bigger, you can see that little tiny little white dot. That represents nothing. It is the origin. It is nothing. It is the absolute abstract nothingness. And for this exercise, we want to try to contemplate nothingness. If you've experienced nothingness in meditation, then this should be easier for you to run through this thought experiment. The Buddhists talk a great deal about no self. Obviously, nothing cannot have a self. Nothing means no self. And if you contemplate what that means, to be in a state of having no self, we're going to be using the source code of language. If something has no self, it is said to be selfless. Right? It has no self. And the absolute abstract essence of no self, because really it's only an essence, because it doesn't actually exist. It's ephemeral. Nothing exists. It exists in this ephemeral state of pure selflessness. A selfless existence, an existence that is selfless, but its nature, its defining quality. Where's my? Okay, yeah, here. Can we get that? Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Okay. Its nature, its defining quality is selflessness. Its quantity let's just pick this. Oh, I know it's too similar. Let's go with this. Okay. Its quantity is zero, nothing. It has no quantity. It has an absence of quantity. There is no quantity, no self. Quantity doesn't exist. There's no quantity. There's no noun. It exists to be, but it exists in a state of pure selflessness, a state of pure quality. And that quality is selflessness. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that word was a verb, to be. But to be what? There's nothing to be. It cannot be anything. And it has no self to be. It is selfless. It is selfless. And we know from the Lord's Prayer that we have a word that is synonymous with is, and that word is art. Our Father who art in heaven. The absolute nothing, the absolute abstract nothing. The known absence of quantity. Art selflessness. The adverb, the quality of the verb, the quality of the word that was in the beginning and is now and shall be. Art, selfless. Now, why is this important? This is important because of the quality of selflessness. Selflessness longs to be. It longs to actualize, to realize its selflessness. But to realize selflessness, one must be able to give of oneself. Well, this is problematic when one has no self from which to give. But more importantly, it's even more problematic when there is no self to give to. Because we have a zero quantity. All we have is selflessness. All we have, art selfless. This is why in esotericism, they say that the absolute is profoundly unknowable to itself. Because nothing can know nothing. And more importantly, selflessness cannot know itself without a self and another. So, we have the phenomenon that we are looking at, and just let's see if we can okay. They changed this. They must have changed this on an update. This was not like this. I used to be able to just draw a circle. I just want a circle. Oh my God. On another note, Microsoft is in big trouble. Windows 11 is a terrible virus, and it's getting around like how much people hate it. So I'm just gonna try to do my best to it won't even delete what I highlight to delete. Okay. See, that looks like if I press that, shouldn't it just... Okay, how can I remove the fill? I don't want to fill. Oh, I bet you I know what the problem is. What if I made the background white? No, it still doesn't change anything. I apologize for this technical difficulty. Won't let me select it, won't let me delete it. Okay, let's, and it used to be that if I just drew a circle, it would automatically like make it a proper circle. Okay, so we're just gonna do this as best we can. Okay, get away. So the 0 point, the nothing, expresses, it radiates. It radiates out to another point whose quantity, right, its value, its intrinsic value is also 0. But because it's a point that has radiated out from the first point, it also has a value of +1. We started with nothing, and now we have +1. 1 point, which is infinitely small, which means its quanta is 0, just like the source from which it came. But it radiated out a value of 1, one other point, one other 0. But it's a point. And the distance from one to the other, distance, we have to think in completely abstract terms here. That has a value of 1. But, as we've looked at before in the past, in a universe of nothing, of nothingness, if you have one thing, if you have 1 point, that 1 point is everything. That's the circle. So that +1 is +1 infinity. Because I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But anyway, it's everything. That's what the circle represents. Doesn't matter which direction you go, it's this circumference is 1 radius away from the origin, right? It's a distance of 1. But if you have 1 point, if you only have 1 phenomena in the universe, that 1 phenomena is everything. There's a problem with this continuum, though. And the problem is that the origin is separate from everything. The source is separate from everything because we have to try to empty our minds and empty all of our comprehension of existence and realize that what we are looking at is the only thing that exists is a single dimension in which 1 point is everything. So you have to try to imagine an existence as a point on a continuum that's infinite. That's the circumference and the circumference alone. There is no other dimensionality. There is no area, in other words. But because that circumference is defined by a radius, the first act, right? This was the first action, was selflessness to radiate, for that 0 to project itself, to express itself into a 1, into a self. That selflessness projects or radiates out its selflessness as an other, but as a something, because it began as no thing. So it radiates out selflessness, its selfless nature. The adverb radiates selflessly, or sorry, the verb radiates The adjective of selflessness radiates. But you can't have, in a universe of one dimension, the source cannot be separate from that dimension. It's an impossibility. So, what if in the continuum of that dimension, what if we put, you go away. What if we were to put you might say a twist in the continuum? Now you're dealing with two circles and that cross, then but you go through the 0 point, the origin. The continuum now passes through the source, or the source is connected to the continuum. And it begins to make sense here, because if to radiate out one thing, which is everything, then this is addition. This is the addition of one. Well, that radiation, that addition, had to come from somewhere, and it came from the source. So it only makes sense that that addition of one came at the cost of subtraction of one self, one infinity, because one only thing, that one thing that was added was taken away from the source. And that is what's reflected in the circle, that what we might call below. In order to move through the continuum, to experience this continuum requires not just addition and subtraction. In order for this continuum to exist, we have to have the opposite of radiation. And the opposite of radiation is gravitation. Gravitation. In other words, the positive one radiated out from the source, and so did the negative one. It radiated in the other direction. Those are two examples of radiation. So to get from 0 to 1, this part of the curve represents a radiation. But to return from 1 back to 0, that's gravitation. So a movement away, outward from, and a movement toward, back in. So you can say out and in if you, right? Out, or, away. And then gravitation is in, or toward. Right? We're talking about the base code of reality here, of manifestation, of realization itself. But then to get from the source to -1, we have to go through another radiation, and then there's another gravitation back to the source. Gravitation and radiation. +1, -1. Addition and subtraction. We are beginning to unfold simultaneously the qualia and the quanta that are beginning to define reality as we know it. Just in pure abstract archetype. Now, if you plot this out, now, okay, well, just before we get there, I'm going to pick a different color here. If we go from 0 to 1, back to 0 to -1, and back to 0, we have radiation, gravitation, radiation, gravitation. And if we continue along around this continuum, that means we have radiation, gravitation, radiation, gravitation, radiation, gravitation. In other words, we have an oscillation between in and out, in and out, in and out. We have a breath. The breathing in and out, away and toward, out and in, out and in, out and in. However, and we can call this a quality because a movement, the direction of movement to away or toward is a quality. The quality of the movement. Is it out or is it in? That's not a measurement, right? It's away, because how do you measure away? Give me the quantity of away. How long is a piece of string? And what about toward? You could talk about distance. We're not talking about distance. We're talking about the quality of the movement, of the orientation of the motion. Radiation and gravitation are qualities of the inherent fundamental movement of creation. In breath, out breath, in and out, radiation, gravitation. These are not quanta. These are qualia. So where is the quanta? And as you can see, these are absolute objective truths. We arrived at this absolute objective truth together as a matter of course. The one thing that is everything cannot exist on its own, cannot exist as a single thing. It has to exist in this duality, in this opposite, as we described, of an addition of one thing requires the subtraction of that thing from its source. That's called sacrifice. That is the nature of selflessness. If selflessness is to give of itself, it must sacrifice what it gave from itself. So from nothing, positive something is created, the negative something comes into existence. Because that negative something is the absence of something. Zero is not the absence of something. Zero is whole and complete in its existence. It's pure. It's the pure essence of selflessness. To express that, to radiate that, to add that selflessness as a separate point, that selfless point must be taken from its source. And so that is a point of absence of selflessness. Because if this is positive 1, this is negative 1. Negative 1 is an absence of positive 1. It is a subtraction of positive 1. And whereas this addition is a radiation and projection of pure selflessness, the subtraction of selflessness and the absence of selflessness creates the self. A self. And that self is the void or absence of selflessness. But because all of this is united and together into a single continuum, and the regular oscillation of radiation and gravitation, the in-breath and the out-breath, you cannot have one without the other, means that selflessness is in an eternal interplay with the self, with self as a quanta. But if selflessness is the qualia, then the qualia of self is selfishness. Can I, let me see if I can. Now here's where it gets interesting. Because radiation and gravitation are qualia, the quanta of the movement about our continuum to get from 0 to 1 back to 0 to negative 1 back to 0. I'm going to, I think this is better drawn this way. We call this 0, and we have 1 and negative 1. And we go from 0 up to 1. This we say is plus 1. And to go from then 1 back to 0, we have to go and subtract 1. And then we are at 0. But then to get from 0 to negative 1, guess what? We come back here. Now, what did we do to get from 0 to negative 1? This is where I try to make it a little bit interactive. To get from 0 to plus 1, we added 1. To get from plus 1 back to 0, we subtracted 1. How do we get from 0 to negative 1? Okay? We subtract 1. And to get from negative 1 back to 0, we add 1. This is a complete movement across our continuum. Now, something, hopefully, you will have noticed. The quanta of this movement is +1, -1, -1, +1. The qualia of that movement is radiation, gravitation, let me just move it back down so it's okay. Radiation, gravitation. The qualia of the movement is absolute. It does not change. It does not matter. The qualia of the action, of the movement, of existence is absolute. It is objective. It is unconditional. It's regular. Regular. Like Scooby-Doo would say. RG, 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 RG. This is regular. And you can be damn sure that when you put in an axis, and these are U's, you can be damn sure. Oh, and there's one other thing, and that's the letter E, which is related to the number 3, but we'll get to that. When you get E and U and L and RG, 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 you get the word regular. Oh, sure, there's an A. Okay. But you get the gist, right? Now, what is irregular? The quantity, the quanta associated with this regularity, this breath, whether radiation and gravitation is positive or negative, whether it's an addition or a subtraction, is entirely conditional on whether you are so-called above or below. Because this arc of radiation is adding 1, and this arc of gravitation is subtracting 1. But this arc of radiation below the line is subtracting 1, and this arc of gravitation is adding 1. So whereas the RG, RG, RG is regular and oscillating and absolute, beneath it, the quanta is positive, negative, negative, positive, positive, negative, negative, positive, and so on. But on our continuum, you see that one continuum, the positive 1 and positive 1, one in-breath and out-breath, the negatives, that which is below, are together. This has significance by virtue of looking at our continuum from the standpoint of above and below, and the addition of quanta. Two negatives, -1, is it's -2. So it's like +1, -2, +1. but it's that -2 that has a weight to it, that has more gravitas quantitatively. Qualitatively, no, but quantitatively, yes. And this has tremendous implications down the line. Right now we're talking about something that's so ephemeral, so ethereal. We're talking about the world of archetypes. Don't even think about matter or anything else, but this relationship will come into play, and the subjective nature of quanta, it's quanta that is conditional, numbers that are conditional, positive and negative that are conditional. The qualia is absolute, that's unconditional, just as selflessness is unconditional. You might know this better as unconditional love, but the selfishness, is conditional. But that quanta is conditional, it's subjective. But qualia is objective, it's unconditional. Now, that is precisely the opposite of how science sees it, and how science defines it, and how the mind defines it. Why? Because what is the definition of conditional? What did I say? Whether or not radiation and gravitation is positive and negative depends entirely upon whether or not you are above or below. So if you are below, looking up, you see things from a certain perspective. You see them in a certain way. You judge things to be a certain way. But when you see things from the source, and when you look at things from above down, you see them from the opposite way. But when you look at things from the source and you look at things objectively, you see the regularity of the quality, and the quality is objective. The quality, it is what it is. I am that I am. And that's why love can be unconditional. It's the only thing that is unconditional. Only selflessness is unconditional. And the in-breath and the out-breath. You either moving away from it or you're moving towards it. You're either moving away from source or moving towards source. There's no other option. There's no other choice. Coming back to number just for a moment, let's get our two circles back here. One above and one below, and I have to get myself a better drawing program. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is Microsoft is killing every single one of its products, and Windows 11 is the worst, and everything in Windows 11 that comes with Windows 11 is the worst. Okay, so coming around here, we talked about, right, going +1, all right, and then coming back down, that's -1, and then down here, that's another -1, and then back up here, that's another +1. Okay, so we have +1, -1, -1, +1. We've established that. But from the point of view of the movement, of the oscillation, if you are on the continuum going around, from the point of view of progress, of forward movement, of distance traveled, if you want to think about it in those terms, going around the circumference of a circle to 1 and then back to 0, you had to travel the distance of 1 to get to the top, and you had to, that's right, 1. But to get back to 0, you also have to travel a distance of 1. That's 1, 1. And then to get to -1, the point down here, again, you have to travel the distance of 1. And then to get back to 0, the 0 point, you have to, that's another distance of 1. That means we have 1, 1 above, 1, 1 below. And this boy, that's terrible. That might be familiar to you, okay? Because as a fraction, 1, 1 above and 1, 1 below, you can express that like this. (1111). And I've shown you this before. If you do a Google search for 1111 tattoos, do a Google image search for 1111 tattoos. And you discover how many people have that tattooed on their arm, on their leg, right? 1111, 1111, 1111. People call it a portal. People, like, there's all sorts of, people have all kinds of explanations for what 1111 is. But I've shown you what the explanation is. This is 1111. Everything that we've done so far today is 1111. It is the minimum numerical expression for reality. It is the minimum required movement for manifest existence outside of the absolute. It is the minimum qualitative and quantitative expression for manifest selflessness, the expression of selflessness, the absolute essence of selflessness breathing reality into being. That's what 1111 is. It's the number of God. It's the number of the universe. It's the number of creation itself. But it's not a number, it's a ratio. And it's not even, and it's descriptive. It's not purely, we're not talking about quantity here, right? It's not 11. There's no 11 because only one thing exists. Only one, but that one cannot exist outside of 1, 1, 1, 1. But it's not 4, it's 1. But it's in parts. remember that our continuum, we had to create this 8, this shape, because we had to put a twist in the circumference in order to unite the circumference of a circle with its origin. And in doing so, we created, well, we took 2 radii. Let me see if I can go back to I'll just try with white. So we had a radii going to +1 and a radii going to -1. Now that radii is defined by 2 points. So this circle on top, that radii becomes a diameter for this circle up top. And a diameter has to have 2 points. And it has 2 points. It has +1 and 0. And the circle on the bottom has 2 points. It has -1 and 0. But the point in the middle is coincident. The diameter of the circle above and the diameter of the circle below share a common point in the 0 point. +1 is separate, -1 is separate, but 0 is coincident. So you have 3 points and you have 3 circles, because let's not forget the original big circle. In this so each of these 3 points, okay, if we go back to our this continuum, I'm going to number these points so you can see them better. Let me just pick a different color so it stands out. Okay, so this was the original 0 point. That's 1 point. Actually, no, we shouldn't do it this way, because this 0 line is all the same point, right? So this is all 0.111. This is 0.2, which is a +1, and -1 is the third point. Yeah, it's actually better just drawing it here. This is 1 point. This is 2 points. And this is 3 points. The reason why I wanted to show you over here is not so much to number them, but each one of these points represents an interruption of the movement. It's an inflection point. It's a reversal, because at each point, radiation turns into gravitation, and then gravitation into radiation, and radiation into gravitation. So each one of these points is an inflection point that reverses the quality of the movement. The qualia changes. So, and there's only 3 points along this continuum where the qualia that is capable of reversing the qualia of the action. 3 points, because there's really 4 points, but 2 of those points are coincident at the origin. So isn't it interesting? Or is it coincidence, do you think? That this shape if you draw this shape showing the 3 points, the 3 inflection points that interrupt that continuum, and change the nature of the quality of the action, you get this. Now, mathematically, quantifiably, okay, this, okay, this does not equal 1/2 of 8. It doesn't. Mathematically, quantifiably, it does not equal half of 8. But its qualia, the quanta related to its qualia, these 3 points do relate to the 2 halves, right? The 2 halves, the 2 aspects, the 2 qualia of this number. What are those 2 qualia? Those 2 qualia are radiation and gravitation. And positive and negative. Positive 1 and negative 1, and positive 1 infinity and negative 1 infinity. In other words, duality. And 3 does represent 1/2 of that continuum, but also both halves. It's related to the 2s, to the 2 halves, the 2 parts, the duality that is expressed in what we call the Holy Eight. But this is not quantitatively so. It is not exclusively, we're not looking at quanta here. This is not simple mathematics. We're talking about the qualia of these symbols and the internal logic and the expression of that qualia through these symbols, through the geometry of them, the abstract geometry of them. And that the 3 points relate to the 3 circles, one being positive, one being negative, and their union, which is the law of 3, which are the 3 points along this continuum. Which are the points where radiation becomes gravitation, becomes radiation, becomes gravitation, etc. There are in total 4 times these qualia. 2 times radiation, 2 times gravitation. And in that sense, that 3 is showing 1/2 of 8. In other words, qualitatively, 3 is 1/2 of 8. But quantitatively, it is not. That discrepancy is what makes all of our quantitative calculations, quantitative mathematics, and all of STEM so misguided, and so barking up the wrong tree, because it's subjective, and it does not respect, and it does not reflect the absolute objective qualia of the minimum expression of reality. The absolute abstract, as the absolute abstract space comes into being, in the absolute first, in the zero dimension, in the dimension of archetypes. Because remember, none of this exists outside of an ineffable field of consciousness, of expression and reception, which is what that first positive and negative is. This is an elaboration. This is this came to me, the numerical aspects of this was revealed to me quite some time ago now. And I've shared the numerical aspects, the quantitative, logical aspects of this with you before. But the synthesis and the difference between the quanta and the qualia of this has only recently come to my attention. And this is only the first step. I'm, going through the process of allowing this to unfold, and because really all of this, what I've shown you, is really only the number one. The 8 and the 3, and I have to jump ahead of myself. Just to be able to show objectively how qualia is at the heart of it all. And that is why we have the ineffable values which you cannot quantify, and why we have these expressions that the things that are most important in life, money cannot buy, and so on and so forth. And we all intuitively know this, but the world functions as if it were not true, which is what makes it so dysfunctional, and why our science is so handicapped and bumping up against the glass ceiling of our full potential. Is because we ignore it. It ignores and cannot synthesize and cannot reconcile qualia and quanta. And because it doesn't know the power of this, and it doesn't know how to integrate this into its present paradigm, we're stuck, because the true nature of reality is qualitative, not quantitative. An objective reality is qualitative, not quantitative. And this is reflected in the relative value we place on priceless art, and the ability for art and the humanities to express timeless universal truths, and the inability for empirical materialist science to do so. We do not turn to science for the timeless universal truths related to the meaning of existence and the purpose for us being here. Materialist science cannot give us those answers. Only the arts can, the humanities, that which concerns itself with qualia. But the problem is, of course, that the humanities and the arts, they don't build bridges. They don't, you can't, they don't do the engineering. They don't do all the practical stuff, the day-to-day practical stuff that makes a civilization run. But they could and they should and they have in the past informed STEM. And when you combine STEM with the arts, when you combine the two, when you unite them, when you reconcile them, okay, you get and this, right? Steam powered the Industrial Revolution. You know, the steam engines of the Victorian era and so on and so forth. And there was this beautiful and wonderful romantic, or perhaps romanticized period of time at the dawning of the Industrial Revolution when architecture was still beautiful and there was a great deal of Victorian values. Sure, there's a lot of exploitation, and it was a miserable existence for coal miners and coal and steel workers, and so don't get me wrong, it was not by any stretch of the imagination a utopia, but there the hopefulness, right, that existed in the works of like Jules Verne, right, and his steam powered, you know, visions of the future. um and when you look at the architecture and the engineering of the time, the machines were made to be beautiful. They captured the aesthetic and this that somehow out of this enlightenment era, out of the science, this technology and engineering was capturing the zeitgeist of the day, and that the art of the day and the philosophy of the era that was informing the science and the technology and the engineering and the mathematics. In fact, the romanticized notions of mathematics still exist today when mathematicians talk about beautiful formulas and beautiful proofs, that there is an aesthetic to when mathematics successfully describe or capture or reflect. And so there's and a mathematician, one who is well versed in that particular language, uh, finds an appreciation in that beauty and that truth in the same way that a musician or an artist or a linguist or a poet appreciates when language or notes or any form of art visualization captures that essence of truth. Beauty is truth and truth beauty. That is all you can know in life and all you need to know. I've quoted that so many times from John Keats's Ode on a Grecian Urn. But then there's also beautiful engineering. And there could be beautiful technology and beautiful science if it likewise embraced the truth and beauty of art, of the objective truth of qualia. But science and technology and engineering, they poo-poo qualia. To them, qualia, quality, it's quality of materials and quality of experimentation and how the experiment is designed. It's all, but it's all about the quality of how it can affirm the solidity and the absoluteness of quantity, of quanta, and the absolute dominion of quanta. And I haven't fully gotten into this yet, but it comes down to the fact that qualia, quality, unconditional selflessness is its nature of that art in heaven. But quantity, the conditional state, its quality is the opposite, is the absence of selflessness. And an absence of selflessness, it's a double negative, right? An absence of selflessness, that double negative produces mathematically a positive. The absence of selflessness is selfishness, the self. And the definition, the quality of self is selfishness. And whereas selflessness is to radiate, to give, selfishness is to take and to hoard for itself. Selflessness gives of itself, selfishness takes for itself, which is why quanta, and quantum thinking, materialism and empiricism, seeks domination and seeks to dominate and seeks power. Why? Because it's selfish and because it's mechanical. And no machine can exist without power. And selflessness is that which radiates as energy. And that which gravitates absorbs or consumes energy. And I've shared this symbol with you before many times. And herein lies where is it? Herein lies the let's see if I can. No. Why don't we find one that's large? I think this is the one that I like to use. Okay, open image in new tab. Okay, here. Oh, Windows, you're just such a pain in the ass. Where did you guys go? You guys are there. There you go. That's the Ouroboros. Now, of course, sometimes this is shaped like the infinity symbol, but it doesn't matter. Radiation and gravitation. You can also think of this as generation and consumption. But that's, by the way, that's another, when you look at our, gosh, where did it go? When you look at our graphic here, and when we talk about RG, radiation and gravitation, that GR, right? That also relates to the word generator. Not just regular, but generator. But let's go back to our Ouroboros friend. This is why the Ouroboros is the primordial symbol for everything. And that how positive and negative, affirmation and negation, right? That's the law of three that that creates and generates. So, okay, let's get some comments here. Benjamin says, aren't we living in the Kali Yuga, an era where much of what passes for modern science and progress feels disconnected from truth? So much of today's systems seem driven by deception, encouraging materialism, emotional numbness, and psychological manipulation rather than depth or meaning. I appreciate you highlighting how genuine quality is often overlooked. Instead, almost everything is reduced to metrics and quantification, usually in monetary terms. Thanks for raising this perspective. No, clearly, I mean, you're right. We are living in the Kali Yuga. But this materialism wasn't born in the last 100 years. And empiricism, this has been creeping in over centuries. It's just the nature of gravitation. As something gains more and more mass, its gravitational pull increases over time. I have yet to formulate this into a complete narrative. This is really just the first step. So give me some time to allow the mosaic to form and formulate with all the pieces falling into place. Because remember that the Kali Yuga is death. And when mechanical nature sees its end, it very often will throw itself into a fit of desperation. Desperate times call for desperate measures. And at those times, the gravitational forces, the forces of mechanicity and empiricism, are the greatest, because the serpent of the Ouroboros is trying to survive, right? So you know how when there's a disaster or a looming disaster or the threat of a looming disaster, you know how everybody runs to Walmart and clears out the shelves, and there's no bottled water, there's no toilet paper, right? And everybody, what do? They hoard. People hoard the necessities. Why? Because they switch on survival mode, because the hurricane is coming, or the snowpocalypse, or wherever's, I mean, we know this from our experience. This is what mechanicity, mechanical nature does. This is what they tell you to do: save money for a rainy day, squirrel money away, build your savings, build a nest egg, build a safety net. And right, we these are all advice that we are given, it's all quantitative, because your quality of life, according to the materialist empiricist point of view, is measured in only one way. How many cans of soup do you have in your bunker, and how many rounds of ammunition do you have, and how many bottles of water, and how many rolls of toilet paper? Benjamin Raphael says, no machine can exist without power. Great line. It really highlights how energy hungry today AI is, especially compared to the human brain, which runs on little power despite its complexity. It's true. It's very true. But the human machine functions on a form of energy that materialist science won't acknowledge exists, right? And that's the vital body. So yeah, your brain needs calories, your brain needs carbs or ketones to run, but that's not the underlying energy that the human body and the brain run on, right? So in a very real sense, we are all atomic beings, right? And the vital body and the sexual energy, it's the creative force of the universe. But that's fourth dimensional energy. It's electric, or you might say, electromagnetic. And so we're somewhat aware of that, but you know how much energy is in an atom, in a hydrogen atom. We know how much energy is released if you split a hydrogen atom. We are mostly water. And water, every water molecule has 2 hydrogen atoms in it. So if you're, 150, 175 pounds, 200 pounds, right? 6 feet tall or whatever, and you're 70% water and 2 hydrogen atoms in every single atom of that molecule of that 70% of what you constitutes what you are physically is hydrogen. A lot of energy stored up in there. A lot of energy there. Something to meditate on and contemplate. This all came about because I was actually writing all of this up in the form of a blog post and or an essay that I plan on submitting to something known as the Essentia Foundation. The Essentia Foundation is they have a YouTube channel, and it's a not-for-profit organization. I'll just read this for you. It says, Essentia Foundation aims at communicating in an accurate yet accessible way the latest analytic and scientific indications that metaphysical materialism is fundamentally flawed. Indeed, clear reasoning and the evidence at hand indicate that metaphysical idealism or non-dualism, the notion that nature is essentially mental, is the best explanatory model we currently have. This is known in specialist communities, but hasn't yet been openly communicated in an accessible manner to the culture at large. Essentia Foundation hopes to help close this communication gap. Although we acknowledge that analytic or scientific understanding in and of itself isn't life or behavior changing, only felt experience or knowledge by direct acquaintances, in modern culture, the intellect is the bouncer of the heart. Therefore, we aim to create intellectual space and legitimacy for the notion that, at its most fundamental level, all reality unfolds in an extended field of mentation. And what got me on to the topic of Quanta and Qualia was one of their videos. They had a guest, and they were talking about quanta versus qualia and empirical science's skewed preference for one over the other. And as you know, I mean, I have this channel and so on and so forth, but as you know, much like the selflessness at the heart of our modeling here, okay, that selflessness, that art seeks to be created, yes, but it also seeks to be experienced. Knowledge seeks to be known. Selflessness, yes, it's unconditional, but it seeks to be received. Potential seeks to be realized. That is what is most fulfilling to the absolute essence of selflessness. That it may come to know itself through giving to others, and that others experience and receive that selflessness. And so when I come across something like Essentia Foundation, and they have this goal, and they have some rules and a way to make submissions, and they have rules and criteria to make submissions, well, I have something to offer. I have something to submit, right? I have something to that might be of potential value to them and their goals. So I'm going to try to do that. And that's what I was working on during the week in an essay form. And today was me just sort of trying to express it in an off the cuff kind of a way, but also allow it to take me to the next step, right? Eduardo asks, what happens when selflessness is not received or there is no outlet for that reception of the selflessness? Well, the universe is created. And if you're asking me on an individual level, like on a personal level, when your inner source of selflessness is denied or there's no one to receive it, we have a word for that, right? It's called unrequited love. And there's nothing more tragic, is there? Unrequited love, unrequited, unreceived, unquitted, unrealized, unfulfilled. And you feel unfulfilled. When you say what happens, well, nothing happens. If it's then you try something else. If you love someone and they don't love you back, then you can remain obsessed over them, I suppose, or you can not identify, not attached, and move on. I mean, that's on a romantic level. If you're looking for a place to park your car, you keep driving around until you find an empty spot, and then you pull into it. What else can you do? But that longing, that drive, that the passion of selflessness is so powerful. It is the universe. It is the reason the universe exists. And if there are obstacles in our way preventing us from expressing that, there's nothing is preventing us from expressing that passion. But there may be obstacles preventing that passion from being received by many. We don't need to be received by many. There's a line from the Talmud, which I can't give you the original Hebrew, but it says something to the effect of, "He that saves one soul saves the world entire." And this is a sentiment which you will find in scriptures and mythologies and stories, the entire gambit, the entire spectrum of human experience. That sentiment exists. And why people will say that their entire life was pointless and meaningless until this one day, this one point where they saved a complete stranger, and finally their life had meaning. So it really depends on you as an individual, but then there is something to be said for non-identification and non-attachment. Remember that selflessness is unconditional, and that includes the condition of being received. In other words, if you cannot force somebody to appreciate what you have given them or what you have done for them. You did it for them in and of itself because that's what you needed to do, and that's what fulfilled you, and that's what was right. But whether they noticed it, appreciated it, were grateful for it, or acknowledged it in any way, shape, or form, or maybe they shat on it, pissed on it, that is not your concern. It's not in your hands. But the opportunity to give to someone, you'll keep looking, you'll keep searching until you find that outlet, until you find that opportunity, that open door, that open window, or whatever the case may be. There's a million different symbols and allegories and analogies for this. So, persistence and grit and awareness, and for when those opportunities present themselves, to be ready for when they present themselves. And for me, at least, that Essentia Foundation call for submissions and that expressed, now I could be naive, but it's an open door. So I'm going to at least make one submission and see what happens, right? So there's a difference between having an outlet for expression and having an avenue for reception. That's two different questions you're asking there. Just so that you realize that. But yeah, I know, but that feeling is a terrible feeling. That and I'm trying to think. Nikolai Tesla, Galileo, Copernicus before him. But when Galileo was locked up, he was imprisoned because he had his telescope, and he was trying to convince the Pope that the Earth revolved around the sun. Or then there's Mozart, who died a poor man because much of his music was not received, certainly not the way it is today. There's countless artists and creatives and scientists who were, we call them, ahead of their time. And they were outliers, but they were geniuses. But isn't that one of the archetypes, the misunderstood genius and the tortured artist? And there are musicians, there's countless examples of artists and creatives and scientists whose theories or works were shat on in their day, but then decades later or centuries later, they were vindicated. And that's why it's not easy. It's painful. It's very painful. But letting go of our attachment to outcomes is so important. And just doing the work and staying true to the art and serving that art and allowing that art to do what it has to do through us, and then letting go of our attachment to where it ends up and what it ends up doing and whether or not anybody even pays attention. I mean, look at me. I'm here every Sunday. I have a few hundred subscribers on YouTube. And at most, On a good Sunday, in the past, at most, I've had about 12 people watching. Today, according to StreamYards, it's been 4 or 5. Is that discouraging? Is that disheartening? A little. But then again, as I've said countless times, these live streams are as much for my benefit as they are for anybody else's. And that either I'm never meant to so-called make, to be on so-called prime time, or I'm just not ready. And that these live streams are a proving ground and a way for me to practice speaking without notes and practice speaking about these topics and testing different ways of talking about them and showing them and so on and so forth. And in the case of today, learning the hard way that I really do have to get a better whiteboard freaking drawing program, because this Microsoft one is just driving me crazy. Does anybody else have any other questions or comments? If nothing else, I am hoping that today gives us a starting point, a foundation for a new direction to go in terms of exploring the underlying nature of reality, and that how much the world has everything upside down and topsy-turvy, but that there's a reason for that, because how else is a machine going to think? And that a subjective conditional point of view can't help but see things from that limited perspective. And if that limited perspective is selfishness, materialist mechanicity, because a machine cannot live without power, then it's going to covet that power, right? And it's going to seek to hoard that power. It's going to seek for that for its continued existence. And what we haven't gotten into today, but we'll get into some more maybe next week if it's possible, is to show how the quanta and qualia express philosophically in order to create gnosis. How the selflessness that is trapped in selfishness, how it escapes and accumulates knowledge of itself. But in order to do that, I'm definitely going to need a better drawing program for us to be able to look at that in a reasonable way. And much more, right? So really, I'm trying to go back. There's a fellow by the name of Tom Billieux. He's got his own YouTube channel called Impact Theory. He's also a materialist, empiricist, and pragmatist. And he talks about, but one of the things he talks about all the time is returning to first principles. I've tried to talk to him in the past about what the real first principles are, which he rejects wholeheartedly because he's a materialist. He's a materialist, an empiricist is not going to accept this model as first principles. But these are the first principles, that the universe is qualitative and objective reality is qualitative. There is no objective materialist reality. There is none. That is the illusion. The belief that material reality is objective, that is the illusory conditional belief. That is not an absolute truth. That is a conditioned belief. So that's something else for you to contemplate over the next week. Anyone have any more questions or comments? I'll give you a minute. I chose as the background today Yggdrasil, right? The tree of life. Kind of had a above and below thing going on there, I guess. I don't know. But people have been talking about the code, the information in DNA, and that there's information at the most fundamental levels of biology. There seems to be information coded in so that like DNA is it's like a program. It's a language. It's a code. So who coded it? Who programmed it? And that's all well and good for geneticists and molecular biologists and so on to recognize that and make that observation, because that's their field. That's what they know. What I'm trying to do is go straight to the source. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay. Yeah, the Word was selflessness. And work forward from nothing and allow the matrix to unfold as it must. How else could it? With each and every step, when we return to this is why I brought up first principles. When you go to the fundamental nature of qualia, then the next step follows as a matter of course. It becomes self-evident. Evident in and of itself. We're not talking about self now as a self, because that self only comes about through the expression of the absolute, abstract, objective qualia of the universe. Then the self synthesizes as you might call a necessary evil. If you wanted to, eventually end up at those words, good and evil, then we have this word, necessary evil. Yeah. That's the reason why we have that expression, necessary evil, is because the self is necessary. Without a self, what is selflessness? This is really what Eduardo is ultimately asking. What happens to selflessness without a self to receive it? Well, the answer is selflessness creates a universe, creates a self in order for it to express and know itself as pure selflessness. That's what happens. Benjamin says, thank you for always sharing your insights. Wishing you continued success in all your endeavors, sir. Well, thank you, Benjamin, for being here. I want to thank all of you for being here today. If there are no more questions or comments, I want to wish you a very happy week. Hopefully, depending on where you are, the weather will be on the up and up. Here where we are, I was checking some of the long-term forecasts. They were saying we might even reach, oh my God, above 0 degrees centigrade. My God, on Tuesday. So we'll see if it gets to that level. I've got a lot of scraping up snow and stuff off the sidewalk to do. So hopefully sunshine and nice weather and good things for you this week. Have a great week. and I'm going to be working on this, uh, seeing where it goes next. And then hopefully next Sunday, I'll be sharing all of that with you as well. So until then, take care, everyone. Have a great week. And as always, inferential peace. And we'll see you next time.